Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's podcast from. And a subject that has been discussed, I won't say widely, but certainly in recent months, we've had more and more discussions on the podcast about the subject of accessibility, of diversity, of sustainability. And these are all things that I suspect are going to make themselves known in the topic of today's conversation as we welcome our guest. Joining me today is Robin Carlisle. Robin is an experienced business consultant for over 30 years within business, the events sector, and a name that, if you've worked in the events industry for any length of time, will no doubt be familiar with. Robin, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast, and thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for asking me.
Not a problem at all. As I said, you are somebody with rich experience going back for several decades in business, and specifically within the event sector, having run and developed businesses, and very well known businesses. Before we dive into maybe a bit of the subject matter of what we're here to talk about today, would you mind maybe just giving our listeners a bit of context as to what your career involved in the events industry and what you did?
Yes, I was involved before I started mobile promotions, and with a number of friends and colleagues I met along the way post college and those learning days. Mobile promotions was our mainstay business for 30 plus years between myself and my wife, and a number of really great people who joined in and helped us push it along. And then I needed to look at succession plan, really. We have a small family. My son's in the city in London, and quite happy there. I'd never be able to afford to pay him what he earns. But so it seemed natural to cast around and see where we would go with it. And met some great people. You'd call it a sellout, I suppose. I stayed, became chairman of a group we created. And that business, I'm pleased to say, is going from strength to strength. But sort of chairman was not for me, and we shook hands, and I decided to get back into my own world, if you like. And that started with everybody around me, and particularly in the village pub, congratulating me on being retired. But I kept saying, no, I'm not going to retire. I have to keep my hands onto something.
Sure.
But starting a business was not really part of it initially. So I took up one or two interests I've had for some time, one of which is to volunteer as a governor to a brand new school very close to me here. And it's happens to be a special needs school for SEND youngsters, pupils. They started off with one year, year 7. We added year 8 last September. At the same time, added a really fascinating bunch of 16-year-olds. And that's really what the school's all about, helping these young people through their challenges. And it's really in the area of autism and that spectrum. So all to do with, I suppose, cognitive challenges and so on. It's opened my eyes, it's opened my senses, it's opened everything up in my mind to how lucky I've been, how lucky we are with our family, and how challenged many people, not just youngsters, but many people have been in their lives and will be in their lives. So if I can do a small thing to help, that's really where we're coming from. And it has also made me think over the last year or so, well, how are we coping with this in the world of events? From one or two conversations I've had in the last 2 or 3 months with the trade shows, it seems to be, yes, there are some specialists, and of course there are people far more well informed than me. But I'm not sure it's actually getting through to all the organisers of events, on a wider and broader subject matter. I mean, recently, for instance, I went to a trade show, and awful lot of chatter about sustainability, and the presentations were obviously very hard hitting on sustainability, and almost frightening that local councils who of course, and national authorities that issue licensing for events are going to bring sustainability much more front and center, and not just a case of ticking boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think more and more focus will be on that, and I want to raise the banner that there should be a focus on a sector of people who, many of whom probably have to steel themselves to go to an event, have to make a lot of special plans to go to events,
Mm-hmm.
and be sure that they are managing their levels of anxiety, or somebody, their support group or individuals around them are helping them to manage levels of anxiety. And those people who can't overcome that on their own, or with their support group, are missing out on all of the wonderful experiences that our live event, particularly our live event industry, brings, and our trade shows bring, and festivals isn't just loud, noisy, banging music. So what's happening in that sector is really what I'm interested in discovering.
And we should never underestimate the difficulty that it may take one person to do something that you or I find particularly easy. And that could be something as simple as walking through the doors onto a show floor at a trade show, or walking into a busy social environment, a music concert. There are things that many people take for granted as being relatively easy to do, that when we start to understand the group of people that may have challenges, there are all sorts of different terms, neurodiversity, people who may be on the autistic spectrum, some of the challenges that people who I say suffer, we shouldn't use the word suffer, that have and are diagnosed with certain conditions. We should never underestimate just how difficult it is for them to do certain sort of simple things. And I suppose being able to see them at school level and see these children that you've worked with in your role as a governor is perhaps the best start point in many respects, is that you can see how they are developing as young people, and in turn then some of the challenge that they may face when they get to adult life and potentially into a business and a working life.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there's some wonderful people in our school, and from what I've seen and researched, there's some fantastic people in a number of these facilities. And they're not just schools. They're places where, I was watching something on some research I was doing this morning, and there was a bunch of really challenged young people who were surfing on a whitewater machine down in the West Country, and you can see the levels of anxiety. And yet, once they had been coached and coaxed into believing that they're capable of doing it, it's just a piece of sheer magic. And of course, it brings smiles to their faces, smiles that prove positive to themselves and all those around them. And I think it also, one of the most telling things at the end of that little piece of video I was watching was the specialists, the teachers, saying, of course, it's not just giving them a piece of fun they wouldn't normally have. That's a major part of it. But it's giving them the opportunity to believe in themselves and to have their own confidence that, wow, I've done that. They stand back and look at it to start with and couldn't imagine themselves doing it. There was another piece where there was a youngster abseiling down the side of let's call it a hillside, not a mountain, and in a wheelchair. That again, it proves the same point as far as I'm concerned. And taking it into events, where you've got the physical and visual aspect of people's disabilities, where maybe they can't speak, maybe they can't hear even. Some of that may be obvious if they're in a wheelchair, crutches and so on. All of those things are obvious if they have a single carer with them, or even a bunch of carers around them. Some of those things are obvious, but many, 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 many people, and certainly, and again, not just young people, many adults, young adults, various ages, have these levels of anxiety. They haven't been diagnosed. If they have, it's been a later life thing. And I just fear that many of them won't get the same opportunities that I've had
Mm.
and my family get, and many others and friends I have who aren't in this sort of in this
Topsy-turvy
situation.
industry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, yes, and I think also I don't think COVID has helped. I mean, that's made us all very nervous about being out still. Although I think we're beginning to get through that. I like to think we're beginning to get through that.
Yeah, I think we are. Yes, yeah, I think we are. Yeah, and
But sorry, go on.
go no, you go ahead, Robin. I've got some
Well,
I've got some
I
things
think
I've scribbled down.
okay, but I think one of the things it does also, and what I think what it has done, it's made us more concerned in some cases about authority. We've had the authority of, oh, you can't go here, you can't sit there, you have to do this, you have to do that, you can't
Mm,
go there without a mask, and all these. That's still a latent situation, and at the same time, sadly, it. I don't think it's fair to say it's bred a different type of person, but it has brought authority to the fore. And the number of times, put it into a natural shop situation, the number of times we
mm,
go into a shop, a pub, or whatever, we're standing there patiently, waiting to buy something, order something, and the person or people behind the counter, say the sales counter, are busy chatting to themselves, or they look up and ignore you, or it's almost a sort of "what do you want" attitude that still
mm.
exists,
Yeah,
and that
it does.
maybe has become more prevalent with that authoritarian aspect of life we've had post COVID. Again, if you imagine you're going in there, you're not sure enough, you're not sure of yourself, you have no confidence, you've steeled yourself to get there, you've steeled yourself to make that step, and you're faced with that. You're faced with somebody who isn't warm, isn't smiley, isn't going to treat you like you're used to being treated. Certainly, the case of young people
Mm.
at the sort of schools that I've seen online, and the sort of school that we are. So, I won't say you're going to turn and run a mile, but many of us would do that anyway, and certainly those people who suffer these anxiety
Mm.
factors through autism and similar things are
Yeah,
not even going to get past the first base.
and when you boil it down to sort of simple objectives, as event organisers, we want people through our doors.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and whilst there are all sorts of different and fantastic ways we can now collate and justify, return on investment and visitor activity, we can track them through spaces. Ultimately, headline figures and people through the door still plays a huge part in any event, regardless of its type. And unless we are aware of the subject of inclusivity, and unless we are aware of the challenges that some people may face, and unless we then take action as to how we can better accommodate them, better welcome them into our events, what we're ultimately doing is potentially alienating a group of people from those headline figures, from those attendance figures, from coming to our event. So it has to start at base level with a education and an understanding of what those challenges may be, and ultimately what that leads to is the development of new techniques, new ideas, new things that we can do on our event floors, so to speak. That maybe help people with that, if that makes sense. I think it has to ultimately come down to our understanding of it, which I think arguably is much better. We talk about it and we have a greater awareness of this subject than we did pre-pandemic 5 years ago, 10 years ago, definitely.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think it's a case of education. I mean, I consider myself somebody who never stops learning,
Mm.
and certainly since I started at the school, um, I've begun to realise far more so than maybe I did previously that learning, training, teaching, if you like, is a two-way street. It's a journey in both directions, and I've learned a lot
Yeah.
from my experiences. I've learned a lot from the young people. I've learned a huge amount from the teachers and the teaching assistants,
Mm.
staff, and I mean that's something I also helped out with towards the end of COVID. When the school were under a little bit of pressure on a couple of days, I went in and became a teaching assistant. So I actually sat
Amazing.
amongst the youngsters, and that was just the most wonderful experience. The most
Mm.
wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where I've got so much of the feedback. Okay, we call it feedback, but I've been in a learning curve, a big learning curve.
Yeah, and I think the subject as well. We shouldn't forget that this is not just about welcoming attendees or potential audience members to our events, but when you widen that, and we were speaking to the good people from Clusivity and a few weeks ago on the podcast, and for anybody listening today, just if you haven't listened to that one, just go back after you've listened to today's episode and listen to the podcast that we did with Clusivity, and we mentioned in there the fact that there's this huge drive in the events industry at the moment to be more sustainable, and where a lot of people assume that that's, let's use recycled coffee cups and let's bring water bottles and let's not use as much paper. A big element of sustainability is your investment in people, both the people that work for you and the people that are making up the audience numbers and the attendees at your event. And by investing in people and by being more aware of what their requirements are and their needs are, and making your event more accessible to people who may have specific challenges, you're ultimately going to push yourself as a more sustainable event in terms of being able to sustain yourself for a longer period of time, because you're welcoming more people. And I'm sure that's probably something that you've considered as well, is that the subject of inclusivity is a bigger part of sustainability as recycling is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I do tend still to think that inclusivity, the focus tends to be on those things that we can see, and those things that are more obvious, and
Yeah.
those things that perhaps are more obviously in the news as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you think that we could, from a capture point of view, and I mean in terms of event registration, for example, when you're asked to register for a trade show, you're often asked, do you have any special requirements? How honest do you think people are in actually using those options that they may have to contact an event organizer? Do you think it's welcoming enough, and do you think enough is done at the moment by event organizers to actually offer a point of contact for anybody who may require some sort of special assistance?
yes, yes and no, really. I would say yes, but again, I think some of this is far too focused on the obvious. It's sort of, the question often has accessibility as part of it, which suggests, do you need help with a wheelchair, or yes, we do have ramps, and we have whatever is needed for the more physical and perhaps the more obvious accessibility issues. But I perhaps don't go to enough events, or the right sort of events, to know whether anybody asks the question in such a way that it's a more open opportunity.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I can only go on the research I've done in the last year or so, and as I say, some of these conversations I've had with within trade shows and within colleagues in the industry, and I do fear that not enough is being done. And of course, inclusivity has added that simple word has added a lot to everybody's awareness. And within inclusivity, there are several factors, there are several categories, if you like. But I'm not sure there's enough focus on, the area that I'm talking about, the autism, the mental issues and the cognitive skills, because they're not seen, they're not obvious to many of us.
Yeah, and I think to an extent, I think events have the ability and may already have the means in which to support people with specific challenges. And for example, somebody who has maybe a mild form of autism may not like particularly loud sounds, so they may be attracted to the agenda at a trade show or a conference, for example, but not like the idea of going to a really loud, busy environment. And so simply by offering them something that maybe takes away the noise, something as simple as a pair of headphones, which we see a lot at conferences now anyway. More and more conferences are using wireless headphones as a means for people to listen to the the conversations that are taking place on the theatre stages and in the conference stages. Something as simple as that could be used and worn constantly by somebody who wants to walk around a show floor, but in a much quieter environment, because it just prevent something within them from triggering that would cause them some level of anxiety, in the same way that maybe a nice quiet space to give people a 5 or a 10-minute or a 15-minute opportunity to go and just break away quietly from that sort of environment. Environments and environmental challenges, when we talk about unseen challenges and unseen disabilities, if you can call it that, I think it's really important that this goes back to the understanding, and what I was talking about is that we really have to understand what can maybe trigger a person with something like mild autism into feeling anxiety or feeling like they are not comfortable in a particular space and wanting to get out of it quickly. Is how can we actually maybe use some of the means that we've already got at our disposal to actually assist with that. The audio one is something that I've had experience with through a personal connection.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Everything you said is part of the preparation that's required. One of the things that we're looking at as a business is the parallel world of virtual reality. And we're working with a company I will mention, actually, VEX they're called.
Yes.
And great bunch of people. And the quality and the speed in which they can build whatever that is reality, they can make it into virtual. So as part of the learning curve, as part of the helping with anxiety by helping people to plan their trip to a particular event, I think there's a real opportunity for the virtual world to work alongside the live world. I mean, many companies are already doing that for their clients, their brands, etc., for training purposes. But I see a niche here also for events and event organisers, to help people understand more clearly what is ahead, what the challenges are, what they can plan for. And as far as my experience goes, and it's not, as I say, it's not extensive. I'm no real expert on the subject, but I think once many of these people have a chance to prepare themselves, that's where the anxiety can be, let's say, affected positively. I'm not saying it can be pushed into the background completely, but confidence can grow, and planning to get to and from that event can grow by seeing exactly what it is that you're going to face. And maybe, if there is some reality built into the virtual in such a way that, there's a very smiley real person, an avatar, but it's a real person talking real words and being that warm, smiling face that everybody would love to see at every event when you get there, when you queue up to have your badge dealt with or whatever. And we all know that doesn't always happen, as I said earlier.
Absolutely, and regardless of whether or not you would you have some of these challenges that we're discussing, or if you don't, there's nobody who doesn't like to be greeted appropriately, with eye contact, with a warm smiling face, with a greeting and body language that suggests I'm happy to see you and welcome and come on in. That's still those sort of fundamentals, particularly in the events industry. We have so many other things that we're considering and juggling that maybe we've forgotten some of the basic fundamentals of human interaction in terms of, what we can ask our staff to do at registration to make sure that they are giving off body language that suggests that they're happy to see these people and that they're being greeted warmly.
No, you're absolutely right. We had our own challenges with finding staff even before the COVID, the pandemic. But we would always focus on those that made us most welcome. And, there's some great people out there. And again, there's some great people who themselves have anxiety issues that they've overcome.
Yeah.
And they understand the need to be warmer and more welcoming. And that's all we're, as you say, that's all we're asking for in our lives, isn't it? To feel a little bit wanted, a little bit needed, and actually the effort we've made to travel an hour, 2 hours on a train, if you can find one, car, whatever. When you get there, the effort you put into it and the cost you put into it has been worthwhile.
Yeah, and nobody should be made to feel that they are either not welcome or can't benefit from attending an event in the same way as somebody else, because they may have a particular challenge that prohibits them from doing so. You know, we are, you know, it will take some effort, it will take a lot of talking, it will also take a lot of education, but we are slowly moving towards a scenario where, you know, hopefully nobody will be prohibited from attending an event. And I suppose the most positive thing that I can see as we start to sort of wrap up this conversation today, Robin, is that there are more and more organizations not springing up, but coming into the event space, certainly, that are assisting them with this particular subject and bringing that awareness to the industry. You know, I mentioned one that was on the podcast a few weeks ago, Inclusivity, but I know, you know, that there's organizations like Eventwell who have done, you know, made huge strides in raising the awareness of mental health issues with people who work in the event industry, and how we need to make sure that the people who work and deliver these events are given the appropriate means to deal with and look after and manage their own mental health. And I think it can only be a good thing that people like yourself come onto the podcast and talk about this, and you continue your own research and your own business development. And, you know, collectively, you know, all of these organizations can hopefully work together with event organizers to maybe start tackling some of the issues, and they are issues at the moment. You know, let's face it, there are issues, and we want to know that anybody could walk up to the door of our event and come in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than happy to be contacted by all those organisations that are already out there supporting, helping, doing it for the, you know, maybe for charitable reasons, or because they themselves are you know, use the word suffering these sort of issues, and they've made a business of it. And I'm more than happy to learn more and hear from them. But equally, I'm more than happy to hear from anybody who we can help
And
push
maybe this is,
information to.
maybe this is a good opportunity as well, where we utilize the podcast to sort of cast the net a little bit further and say to anybody who's listening to this today, if you've got an opinion or a comment on this particular subject, if you're involved in an organization that's addressing this particular subject within the events industry, if you yourself work in the events industry and you have a particular challenge that you would like to see addressed more and supported more by other event organizers and events that you may attend, please do get in touch with Event Industry News. You know, you can visit eventindustrynews.com, and there's ways and means to get in touch with us via the website. On social media, you can find at Event News Blog is the Twitter handle, and you'll find Event Industry News across all of the social media platforms. If you're tuning into today's podcast and you would like to get in touch about this subject and tell us what you think, and you'd like to come on here and discuss what you think the industry could be doing better, please, this is a forum. You know, come on here and have a chat with us. You'd be welcomed with a warm smile and open body language to come and have your chat. Robin, thank you very much for taking the time out today to have a little chat with us about this subject. Great to hear that following the success that you had in business and in the events industry for all of those years, that you still very much wanted to play a role within this, and particularly as you found a subject that, by the sounds of things, a few years ago you maybe weren't as aware of, but certainly are now, and looking to have a positive impact on it.
No, absolutely. And as I say, I'm happy to help anybody who wants to take some steps towards solving their own personal issues or business issues in this aspect. I can be found on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way to find me and my contact details, and either myself or one of my colleagues would be happy to help.
Fantastic. And we should give a mention to the fact that just in the last few weeks, Event Industry News announced the launch of Event Sustainability Live, a brand new trade show that will be co-located alongside Event Tech Live at Excel London. That will take place at the end of November. All of the details you can find on eventsustainabilitylive.com. And I'm absolutely certain, without a shadow of doubt, that this particular subject will form a major part of the discussions of the conference sessions and the panel discussions that will take place during that particular show over 2 days at Excel London. As I said, this subject is very much linked to sustainability within events. Sustainability with our people is as important as it is in terms of sustainability with the products and the materials that we use in our events. So I've no doubt, Robin, that hopefully we may even see you there if you'd like to come along and maybe be involved in some of the discussions that are taking place at Event Sustainability Live. I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss and find out about, and we continue hopefully at that show the theme of education on this subject.
You'll certainly see me there, and you'll even see me before the event, because I shall be asking you the questions about what you're doing to open your doors warmly and in a very smiling and confidence-giving fashion.
Absolutely. Robin Carlisle, thank you very much for joining us today. A final mention, just of course, for the podcast. If you are listening to this today via one of your podcast platforms, audio platforms, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com just to check out the latest news features, special supplements. The Sustainable Event Buyer's Guide is out there now. Of course, the A to Z supplier directory on eventindustrynews.com is always there if you're looking for a product or a service within the events industry. The chances are you will find something that suits on the A to Z supplier directory over at eventindustrynews.com. Thanks very much to everybody for listening today. Do get in touch, as I said, if you have a comment or an opinion or would like to speak up about this particular subject, please do get in touch with us. It's an open invitation to anybody out there. Stay safe, everybody. Look after yourselves, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.